Once we have our site, we can then start to modify it. Now the modifications are on the proposed work, not the existing work. We use a tool like this, like the bulldozer tool, the site modifier tool. You create a shape. That shape can then be a pad or a boundary. The pad is the three-dimensional part. So I'm going to set this to be 17 meters because I want it to go down. Now what we also need around this is something called a boundary. The boundary tells Vectorworks how much of the site is affected by that pad. Now let's update our site. Select your site model, click on the update button, and you should notice now that this has got a big hole in it because of this object. I forgot to put the elevation in. Let's make it 17 meters. Let's update our site model again. That's looking a little better. So what we've got is we've actually got flat land here. Flat land comes all the way through to this point where it starts sloping up. So let me just play with this site modifier. I'm just going to double click on the edge of the site modifier. Let's pull the sides of that site modifier away, the boundary I'm talking about, and let's update our site model. What we should find is that we end up with a shallower elevation here than we've got on that side. So notice the contours are further apart here, so that's more shallow here, it's steeper here. So the closer your pad is to the boundary, the steeper the site's going to be. So that's the basic concept. So you can modify your site if you want. Just going to update that. Now when we look at our massing models had the opportunity to become site modifiers. Now before we make them to site modifiers, they should really be put to the site, and we'll do that in another movie. But the idea is that the massing models already have pads and boundaries built in, and we can use those to modify our site. In some parts of the world, there's a three-dimensional restriction on how close you can build to a boundary. In the town where this site is set, you're allowed to build on the boundary up to 2.5 meters, or just over 8 feet. As you move away from the boundary, you're allowed to build higher. There's a 45-degree plane that you're allowed to build up to. So it'd be kind of nice in Vectorworks if we could create a site model or a boundary symbol which had the three-dimensional parts to it, which would then allow us to put the restrictions on the site and get the right height. I'm going to use the polygon tool for this. I'm going to go back to screen plane. I'm going to click. I'm going to come up by 2.5 meters. Click. I'm going to come in at 45 degrees and click again. 2 clicks to stop. It's a polygon at the moment. I'm going to change to a front view, and just notice I'm drawing in screen plane, so it won't matter which way I am. And I'm going to now convert that to NURBS. So modify, convert that to a NURBS curve, and then make that into a symbol. So modify, create symbol, boundary height. Next mouse click, leave instance in place, and click on that point there. Now what I should have is now an object which I can place on my plan. If I use my symbol tool, so I should be able to find the edge of my boundary, click, and that should give me my boundary object. There it is in 3D. Let's delete that. I really do need to see my boundary edge. So let's just see if we can't make that show up. There's nothing there that's going to change that. Volume, area display, 3D mesh, contour. So I was hoping that we would see the outline of that boundary. If not, we can always use our site survey and our symbol insertion tool. And what we want to do is to click on the edge of the boundary, come out until we're perpendicular with that boundary. Now that may be tricky because as you notice, it doesn't automatically pick up that edge. What if we turn some of these on? Maybe this will help me. So click and perpendicular. So that's a lot easier to do it that way. Now I've got the first one on, so I should be able to use tools like my Move by Points tool. Let's make several copies. And what was that option? Retain. I should really retain the original. And so we're going to, from there to say there, 5 copies down the boundary, and I just need one more copy. So just select one, move by points. So from there on, just about there. Unfortunately, I forgot to take that off. That's still got 5, so let's do that again. So click to start, click to finish, so I've just got 1. Back to my symbol insertion tool. Let's click on that boundary. It's come around to on perpendicular. Now what are we going to create? Well, as many as we want, really. Let's make it 7 this time. And if you go to that one, let's try that mode there. What's that mode? Which is the distribute mode. So I've told it 7, so I click at that point, click at the end, and it evenly distributes the 7 from the start to the finish. So I've got all those boundary objects. We do need to get those lifted up to the right height, and there's a great command in Vectorworks that'll do this for me. Select all those objects, go to AEC, Terrain, and Send to Surface. Now just before we do that, I'm just going to change the 3D view. So what you should be able to see now is you can see all my boundary objects, and you can see my site model. So there's all my boundary objects, there's my site model, terrain, and send to surface. And they're all sitting up there now. This corner's missing because I'm missing some data in this corner, so let's just get rid of those ones. So if I move that along there, will that one send to the surface? Let's just check. Good, I was right on that corner. So I've got enough to give me my three-dimensional heights. Now at the moment all of these are symbols, and so it'll only give me a rough idea as to what they're like. If I select all of them, and it appears it's easier to do that in a plan view with my select symbol tool, I can ungroup them, and when I ungroup them they should become a bunch of NURBS. Let's try this one here, convert to group. So they're now 13 NURBS curves, and I could use my loft surface tool to loft all those together. So clicking on that one, then that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. Don't click at the bottom end, it's a bit of a problem. Let's make them ruled so they got square edges, and that's now one big NURBS curve. So there, there, there. Now as long as you're getting that you're clicking at the same end of the NURBS curves, that would be a problem if I did that. But if I click at the bottom edge, that's fine, or at the top edge, that's fine. So let's create that into a recession plane as well. So now what I should have is a recession plane where I can look at my building and see whether my single story building goes through this recession plane. A great trick with the recession planes is to create a texture. New resource, Renderworks texture. I usually use a red color, so I use a plain color, choose a nice bright red color. Where's it gone? Red, that one. And then give it some plain transparency and make it partially see-through. so like 50%. Then just apply that texture to these two NURBS curves. So there's that one there and this one here. Now those two should both be, well, they say they're groups, let's just ungroup those. They should be NURBS surfaces. I don't like the way they've become individual NURBS surfaces like that. Let me just ungroup those and choose model, add solids. I want it to be one solid object. Cool, that's what it is now. Let's just look for our texture. It's a selected object, so double clicking on that texture will apply that texture to that information. That's a group again, let's ungroup it. It's 14 NURBS surfaces. Let's go to model and add solids, and there they are. Apply the texture. Now when I render the view, I should be able to see through my curves. Now there is a problem with those. What is it? Is it that? No fill on that object. So there it is, no fill on that object, so now I should have fill. So now all I need to do is to look at my curves and my site and my buildings all together to see what they're like. It would be kind of neat if I could take all of these massing models and link them to my site model. At the moment they're not linked. If we look at these from a 3D view, you'll see these are all on the ground. They do need to be lifted up to sit on top of the site. Let's go back to a plan view, select all of my massing models, and let's go to AEC, terrain, and send to surface. Now that's lifted all of those up to their relevant heights to sit on top of my site model. Notice how they're no longer sitting on the bottom of the layer. Now if only I could see these at the same time as I see that model. Let's just turn them both on, see what we get. They're not actually lining up, but there's a great tool here, the Unified View. When I click on this, it will line them up. If I render that view, you'll see that this corner of the building is actually penetrating my height to boundary. And it's penetrating by quite a bit. Let me just zoom in so you can see it. So what I have to do is I have to move my building and my garage to the north, I guess it is, so to the northeast, to get them out of that height to boundary. So one of the things I can do is I can go to a top view, render it. I could probably even measure it if I wanted to. I can see that distance there. So in plan view, that garage and this house both have to slide up the site to the northeast. So I could just drag them like that. So I need that house. I'm just going to turn off my site model to make this easier. So I need that house and that, and drag them up. So that's where I want it to go, so drag that up to there, and this one as well, drag that up to there, and that as well. Let's turn on my site plan again, let's render the view, make sure that we're now complying. There we are. I could be more accurate, I could cut a section through this and do it much more accurately, but at the moment I just want to get it roughly at the right place. The massing models have an option on them, and it's called Use Site Modifiers, and they will create cuts into the site. Now all I need to do is go back to my massing model down here. Let's just turn off that one there. Now at the moment the settings on the site model settings say Use Site Modifiers only on the same layer. If I do all layers and OK, don't worry about this. I've now got the cuts into my site, so now I can actually see where my buildings are cutting into my site. It's really quick to set up. When we turn on both of those and we look at it from a view, and of course we can use this tool here just to spin around a wee bit. It looks pretty cool. If we render it, we should be able to see our building sits inside our height to boundary restrictions, and it's sitting into the site. You notice there's quite a cut here. So this would give us the opportunity to play with the height of this object. So we could take this house and say, well, actually, because of the site sloping up, I've actually got to lift that object. I need to go back to this layer here. So that house there, I might need to lift that up by a couple of feet in order to get, in order to avoid some landscaping problems around there. If I lift that, if I lift that up by 2 feet, what does that do to my house in terms of the height to boundary restrictions? I don't know if you can see it, just ever so slightly it's cutting in just up here. So maybe I can't lift that up 2 feet, maybe I've got to drop it down by say 150 millimeters or 6 inches. And then, so it's just coming inside that height to boundary restriction. So this is all the information that you can play with at this very early stage.